Yachting Monthly's Deputy Editor Rob Peake talks to Stuart Carruthers, RYA Cruising Manager, about the continued development of wind farms in UK waters and their impact on boaters.
Stuart, in 2001 the first offshore turbine was built in UK waters, and that was in Blyth, at about 10 miles from Newcastle. 10-11 years later, these things are covering our cruising waters. Does the government or do wind farm developers take leisure boaters' interests into account at all?
Yes, they do. I think the answer is that since the first turbines were installed in Blyth, that was clearly a result of the non-fossil fuel obligation, which is now deceased, which gave the whole impetus to the industry of looking at how to develop offshore renewable energy. The process that needed to be adopted from then, round one, was really a series of demonstrator projects to iron out where the wrinkles were. Following that, the then DTI developed procedures for the industry to follow, which resulted in the round two wind farms. And since the government has been involved in the renewable directive, where it has an obligation to produce a certain amount of its energy from renewable sources by 2020, the whole process has been developed. And step by step, with the development of that process, the RYA has been engaged. We have developed our policy on behalf of recreational boating, and we're very pleased to say that our policy has been, and our influence has been acted upon, where we now have been able to influence the development of wind farms.
Today we've got about 600 operational turbines, and I think there are about 600 more which will become operational in the next few years, which leaves the UK quite significantly ahead of the rest of the world in terms of offshore wind. Why are UK waters so popular?
I think it's because, again, going back to the government's obligation to generate 15% of its energy from renewable resources. In the UK, there are a number of types of renewable resource, but it's estimated that something like 35 to 40% of our energy electrical energy will come from renewables. That is a key cornerstone of the last government's policy, who signed up to the Renewable Energy Directive. It is also this government's key strategy for achieving its targets under European legislation by the year 2020. That creates the political and economic factors necessary to encourage the development of offshore renewable energy.
Okay, well, that's some of the theory as to how it all came about. Let's look at some of the issues that actually affect boaters. And of course the first one is how do you tell where these things are? Is every single wind farm in construction and every single wind farm in operation charted?
Yes.
And the big question on everyone's lips, can you sail through them?
Yes. Simply, you can.
You can sail or motor through every single wind farm in UK waters?
Every single wind farm in UK waters you will be able to sail through. There is no exclusion zone around the whole wind farm. What we are asking for at the moment is that any individual operational safety zones around each individual wind turbine generator pylon should be an advisory safety zone, not a compulsory safety zone. That is something that we are succeeding in achieving at the moment, and it is part of the RYA's policy, which we make it absolutely clear both to government and to the developers.
What does that actually mean, an advisory zone?
The developer in producing his application for consent is at times applying for safety zones around the base of each wind turbine tower. He would wish the Department for Energy and Climate Change to declare a safety zone which is compulsory, which in fact, if infringed, would lead to a criminal offence. The RYA resolutely is opposed to any safety zone that would create a criminal offence. However, we do recognise that there might be a pragmatic reason for giving advice to boaters to stay away, more than 50 metres away from the zone. So it's a matter of interpretation and the outcome of infringing the 50 metres that we are concerned with.
Have you tweaked your courses at all? Is there any advice you specifically give out as to sailing through wind farms?
No, I mean, our courses are designed to teach people to navigate properly, to take into risk, to weigh up the factors, and to passage plan accordingly. Not only according to the passage they intend to do, but according to their skills. There is no compulsion to sail through a wind farm. Equally, we're keen to make sure that there should be nothing preventing somebody from sailing through a farm or motoring through a farm, should they wish to do so.
I think in the newest proposed wind farms, for instance Navitus, the turbines may be, if it goes ahead, between 700 metres and 1,000 metres apart, which is quite a big distance. But there are obviously earlier wind farms which are more compact. And what's the distance between some of those turbines?
Well, even so, if you look at the North Hoyle wind farm, which really was the first operational wind farm under round one, built in 2003, the distances between the turbines, I can't give you precise figures, but I've been in that wind farm and they are still pretty big. There is a large degree of separation. Now, North Hoyle was built with smaller generators, hence smaller turbine towers.
Right.
By the time we come to Navitus, it's going to be big generators and big turbine towers and much greater separation.
The other big question for sailors is whether or not their mast could ever be hit by a rotating turbine.
Well, the answer to that is yes, because the benchmark criteria, which has been set out by the RYA and accepted by developers, is that the rotor tip should come no lower than 22 metres above mean high water springs, and that's at the nadir of the swing of the rotor tip.
But you'd have to have a pretty big boat.
You'd have to have a pretty big boat,
yeah.
And you would have to be right under the rotor blade for that to happen. So the probability is small, but it isn't nil.
Is there any anecdotal or scientific evidence to show that once you're in a wind farm, some of these things may consist of about 300 turbines? Do they affect the wind direction? Do they cause gusts? Do they affect the sea state?
You would naturally tend to think that there would be, but there doesn't seem to be any scientific evidence that stacks up to show that that is actually the case.
What's your feedback from RYA members?
Our feedback from our RYA members has only been as a result of a very small survey that we've done to get an idea of how people feel about these things, and that is that they haven't to date had any problems of sailing through wind farms. But it has to be stressed that the wind farms they're sailing through at the moment are basically round one wind farms. They were limited in size to 10 square kilometres and a maximum of 30 turbines. So the experience from that isn't a direct read across to some of the bigger stuff that's being produced under round three, or will be produced under round three.
These things are obviously pretty obvious, and particularly the newest proposed turbines are higher than some of the tallest buildings in London. But at night, how obvious are they? Is every wind farm in UK waters lit?
Every wind farm in UK waters will be lit according to the requirements laid down by the General Lighthouse authorities. Each individual turbine will be lit.
Every single turbine?
The yellow bit at the bottom, the transition piece as they call it, will be lit. Each wind turbine will have some form of light at the top of it. There is some discussion about what that will be at the moment, but most likely red. And there will be, at strategic points around the perimeter of the wind farm, will be proper lighting as well, proper navigational lighting. And
there are a lot of rumours about wind farms affecting radar. If you're within a wind farm, will you be able to? Will your radar be affected, and will you be visible from other boats?
There is an effect on radar. That is the most significant navigational problem, probably caused by the wind farm. It actually isn't caused by the wind farm. It's caused by secondary echoes being picked up by scanner heads, where the return from a wind farm is so powerful that it bounces around all over the place, and it's picking up those secondary echoes that it can appear on the radar screen. Whether that happens to a small yacht or not, I'm doubtful, but certainly on larger commercial craft, I've seen the effect, and it does occur. Normally doesn't occur in the direction of travel of the boat, so if somebody's looking out the bridge window in the direction of advance of of the vessel, it probably isn't going to disturb that picture. But what it can do is, if the radar is adjusted such that there is automatic gain control, it can turn the gain down to filter out these secondary echoes, which might mean that some of the smaller radar returns from small craft will be lost in that automatic control of the radar picture, which is why really in areas of busy shipping lanes it's safer for small craft to be inside the wind farm than it would be in the traffic lanes used by commercial shipping.
Which is the case for some of these proposed wind farms along the south coast, but we'll talk about them in a few moments. On the east coast there's an issue where, for instance, the undersea cable running from London Array, which is in construction, runs over the undersea cable from another wind farm. To protect it, they've created this rock burn, which is very shallow. How badly does that affect passage planning, or could that affect passage planning for sailors? Well,
it could affect passage planning for sailors. I have to say, in that particular area, that's an area where there are quite a few obstructions on the floor, and quite a few areas which are quite shallow. Now, not condoning what's happened there, but the process by which one set of cables overlaid the other is something that we've challenged the authorities on.
Because presumably this will be more and more the case.
It is something that is more and more the case. Clearly, people have been concerned more about what's happening with the actual wind farms themselves. One of the strange things about wind farms is the wind farm developer does not decide where he brings his cables ashore. He has to consult with the national grid that tell him where on their grid they can take the amount of power that this thing is pumping out. And that often isn't at the nearest point to the shore. And in the case of the London Array, which you've just alluded to, crossing the Kentish Flats cables, he has to take them to a different place to where the Kentish Flat cables go because of the amounts of power involved. That has resulted in cables crossing each other. And that is why the developer has produced a rock berm to protect those cables. But that brought the whole process into sort of sharp focus as to how this could happen and how that got through the navigation authorities without further consultation. And that has now been addressed. And in future, we have made it quite clear to government and to the planning inspectorate that we will be paying particular attention to the associated works of building wind farms, and that includes the export cabling.
And London Array is quite an interesting case because it actually stands on top of a very popular East Coast trench, which is often used by leisure boaters.
Yeah.
Could the RYA have done more to protect that?
Do you mean Folger's Gap?
Yes.
Yeah. We have, at the moment during construction, there are restrictions on Folger's Gap. When that construction is over, there will still be a small craft channel through the Folger's Gap, and we have done all we can to protect that.
Okay, so we've seen that you can sail or motor through a wind farm, but what happens if something goes wrong? It being UK waters, you're pretty much bound to be in some significant tidal flow. Can you anchor in these things?
Yes, you can.
There's no restrictions on anchoring?
There might be restrictions in certain areas, and it depends how the turbine bases are built up. But in general, you can anchor where the depth of water allows you to anchor.
Okay. Well, those are some of the potential negative points, but there are some plus points. Most obviously, they can be of navigational use.
Of course. Because they will be charted, they'll be lit, and they'll be marked.
There's another issue that talking to Brightlingsea, talking to Wells, talking to Ramsgate, those are places that have seen a lot of activity with wind farm workers, and in the short term at least those places have been quite significantly revitalised. But how much is that the case long term?
Well, again, that is beyond the RYA's competence as to what the impact or what the positive economic impacts are for shore-based industry. I know that there are examples where that has been quite significant in areas around the coast. Whether that continues or not, and whether the types of port that are supporting the development of round 1 and round 2 farms, which are quite small at the moment, whether those harbours and ports have the capacity to support the larger wind farms that are planned under round 3 remains to be seen. But as I say, it really lies without the scope of the RYA's competence to comment on that.
I think some people have been confused. If you build a wind farm of 130 turbines, that's effectively, in simplistic terms, 130 things we're not meant to hit. How can the RYA not campaign strongly against that?
Well, initially, when the plans were put forward, the strategic environmental analysis was done, the RYA looked at the proposals and objected strongly to areas which it thought were not good for, well, craft of all sorts, you know, the coastal mariner and shipping in general. Because either that it affected recreational boating or it brought recreational boating potentially into conflict with commercial shipping. But it has to be said that by and large, with the pressure on to meet strict targets by 2020, a lot of those representations were swept aside, and we've got what we've got. So it's very much a case of that we did object at the time, but the government leased the round 3 zones. And we now have developers developing wind farms within those zones. Our job now, you know, is to influence those plans to make sure that the impact on recreational boating is reduced to as low as it possibly can be.
So, I mean, if I've got a boat in Poole Bay, if I've got a boat in Brighton or somewhere, for instance, in the Isle of Man, where there's another big, or at the Bristol Channel, those are all areas that in which there could be huge wind farms built over the next 10 years. What's the RYA actually doing for me now?
Well, the RYA is representing to the developers through the government the need to maintain proper marking, to make sure that exclusion zones aren't put in place around the wind farms, and to make sure that they meet minimum design parameters for rotor height and charted depth, so that should you choose to sail through them, you still can do.
Is it a risk that exclusion zones might be put around all wind farms?
There's always the risk, but my view is, with the work that the RYA has done and the representations it has made, that risk is very small indeed.
One of the most contentious areas, certainly in terms of the how vocal its opponents are, is Navitus Bay, which is sort of south of Poole Bay, off the Isle of Wight, and that is quite a, on the face of it, strange site to choose to build a wind farm off the Dorset Jurassic coast, and in quite a busy boating area. Where do you stand on that?
Well, we would agree. We specifically objected to that being a site that mixed too much commercial traffic with too much recreational traffic. As I said a couple of minutes ago, we had basically those representations were swept aside, and we still have specific concerns about Navitus Bay, but we have concerns about a number of other wind farm developments around the coast of the UK as well.
Where are the other big issues?
Well, the other big issues are really East Anglia 1 and the wind farm there, which might combine with the Gabbard and Galloper developments to create narrow channels for commercial shipping, which will potentially cause problems for recreational craft. The Firth of Forth, which is, of course, across the entrance to Scotland's largest port, and also the Irish Sea Zone off Anglesey, which, combined with all the other developments in the Irish Sea and the Morecambe Bay area, will create quite a number of wind turbines.
And that's all round 3. Are we going to see round 4, 5 and 6?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, you just have to look at the government's targets for 2020. At the moment, they're planning to install something like 25 gigawatts of wind turbine energy.
What have we got at the moment?
Well, by the time what is being developed at the moment, there'll be something in the order of about 8 gigawatts. So there's going to be a quantum increase. in round 3. Now, if you look at the output of that, you're looking at producing something at full power, if they're all working, something like 35 to 40% of the country's winter requirement.
At capacity?
At full capacity. But
Which
bearing in
reality,
mind they only work at something like a third capacity, you're looking at an awful lot of turbines potentially down the coast, unless there's a change in the government's strategy and policy.
Each turbine has a life of about 25 years. What happens then? Are we looking at having wind turbines in our cruising waters from now on?
I think we are. I think that will always be part of the mix. I think as technology improves, and certainly over the past 10 years, we've seen the sort of initial type of turbine that was installed at Blyth become 9 megawatt monsters that are going to be installed on Navitus Bay, for example. Then I think as the technology improves, then I think the wind turbine power stations will just will themselves be re-engineered. Clearly the pylons, the bases will be there. It'll be a case of just re-engineering the generator bits at the top.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you.